Very, that's right, you told me.
Welcome to the joint meeting of the Belmont High School Building Committee, the Board of Selectmen, and the Belmont School System. My name is Bill Avallo. I chair the Belmont High School Building Committee. At this time, I'd like to call the Belmont High School Building Committee meeting to order.
And I would like to call the Board of Selectmen to order as we have a quorum.
And I would like to call the Belmont School Committee to order as we also have a quorum.
Great. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to go over the agenda and start with our business right away. So what we're going to do is briefly talk about our budget for Belmont High School Building Committee budget. We're going to unencumber some costs by motion, and we're going to then talk about our work to date on the selection of a construction manager and look for a motion for recommendation there. Been a lot of work by the construction manager at risk selection committee, and we'll hear about that. That won't take too long, and then we'll get right into an update on the site design and traffic discussions. This won't be too lengthy, but this is in preparation for our meeting with TAC this coming Thursday, so 7 o'clock Thursday. And then it will be followed by the Belmont High School Building Committee meeting discussion on traffic and site design on the 16th of this month, so it's not too far away. At that time, we'll open it up for community comments specific to the site design and traffic. If people want to comment and talk about that, we'll open it up for a while, and then we'll go back into the design update on the building itself. And we have a presentation on some virtual reality, which is really just fly-throughs and walkthroughs of the building and in the virtual mode of the building modeling that's been done by our design professionals. Then we'll open it up again for community comments on the building design. So we're sort of organized on topic. And from there, we will then go into some business, approve some meeting minutes, and then I will go through our work for May and June, leading up to our finalization of our schematic design beginning in July. It looks like, folks, we need another meeting. If we didn't have enough, we might need another committee meeting to fit in and get all our work done. So we'll talk about that. Then we'll discuss our update to the PSR, first schematic report, that's going into MSBA tomorrow. And we'll have a motion to approve that so it can be formally submitted to the MSBA for their review. And then if we have time, any new business, which I'm sure we'll have a few things that come along. So without any more delay, I'd like to turn it over to Phyllis, and she's going to talk about our budget that we have so far and some costs that we could, I guess, unencumber, Phyllis? Is that the proper term?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you.
We have, I think you all have this sheet from, that shows our budget to date, and which reflects the encumbered amount of $1.6 million, and we have submitted for reimbursement to the MSBA, and 6 of those have been processed. So we're on our way. We have another couple that have been submitted but are not yet processed. So that's running very smoothly, and those amounts are reflected on this sheet. So we've been reimbursed for $233,000 through those 6 applications. The funds that we have encumbered that we are looking to liquidate are associated with Frank Locker Consulting, which was, as you may all recall, the visioning sessions that were done to help us define the education plan that we're using to define the school. And that original encumbrance was for $34,900. They have been paid out, and the superintendent has indicated that we don't have any further need for those services, and so the amount remaining is $9,950, which we would like to liquidate.
So a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Pat, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
One other item that we had encumbered was for our web design to Jessie Bennett, and while she did do some work for us, we have paid her for that work, and the balance that remains is $3,600 on that contract. And so that purchase order for services, and so we would like to liquidate that amount as well, if the committee would.
Motion to liquidate?
So
Bob?
moved.
What was the amount?
Pat, second. All in favor?
Aye.
3,600.
The last area that we have some funds we would like to ask for your consideration to liquidate is for McPhail. They did some environmental geotechnical work for us, and there is $9,000 there that we are proposing to liquidate for services that will not be needed.
I don't move that we liquidated. I move that we unencumber
Sorry,
it.
my apologies, yes. That we
Bob?
unencumbered.
Okay, second on that? All in favor?
Thank you.
So that gives us what, Phyllis, in available funds? Do you have a subtotal there?
No,
Okay. I'm using my trusted calculator.
24.
Did you want to speak?
Off the top of my head.
And that's about 105,000. So, I mean, that gives us unencumbered for the total project
Yes.
right now, about 105,000. So
Yes.
that update will be important as we move on. But Joel, Joel,
Yes, sir.
just a real quick update on where we are with geotechnical, and then we'll move on, because we did bring up McPhail. We have testing done?
Sure. So there's three parts. There was the geotechnical subsurface investigation that encountered conditions very similar to those that are part of the historical record for the original high school. There were 4 borings done within the future building footprint. There was a geothermal evaluation that's been done, and that will go into the cost estimating for that part of the project. And there was environmental testing done on several of the fill samples that were retrieved from the borings. As it stands right now, based on those data, we do not have a reportable condition to the Mass DEP. We will have some soils that we will have to manage accordingly during construction, but at this point in time, we do not have any regulatory compliance obligations.
Okay, and report will be following on that?
Yes.
Okay, and I think that has to be packaged and put in our schematic design package, yeah. Okay, so that's going to be done at the end of June. Any other questions on that? Then I'll move, I'll ask Pat Bruce to update us on the selection of the construction manager, which I think, Pat, is a good term that we use for this. Instead of CMR, we should use construction manager.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. Sure. So I was the chair of the subcommittee on the construction manager selection. And what we have decided to do as a building committee, which we decided a couple of months ago, is to go the same route we went with Wellington, which was to hire a large construction company to manage the construction. The construction will still be sub-bid in a similar manner to what people are used to seeing, but if one uses this method, which is available to municipalities and has been for about 10 years now, you get to interview and choose your construction manager. What does that do for us? Well, one of the things that it does for us is it allows us to work right now at this stage where we're beginning schematic design. And the construction manager who is going to manage all of the construction, he is a contractor, he or she will be with us at the table and we'll be working on the drawings. We'll discuss with the architect and the project manager the materials that are being suggested, some of the construction erection situations, all of these things in an attempt to help us to avoid change orders, to avoid any additional costs once we actually get the shovel in the ground. It proved to be a very good thing to have done at Wellington, and we have decided to do it with this project. By choosing a construction manager, we also will receive an additional 1% in reimbursement from the MSBA because they recognize this method as being worth something. And it costs a little more, but there is a better reimbursement. And so we are going to do this. So there's a whole big process that one has to go through. It's something that the state has been doing for 20 or 30 years now, probably 30, because I think when we did it at Wellington, we said they'd been doing it for 20. But they had not ever made it available to municipalities to do. And they did just before Wellington. We did it, Wellesley did it, Wayland did it, a lot of communities did it, and we found it to be beneficial, particularly on a large and complex project, which certainly this is. We put out an RFP many weeks ago for firms to apply. As you can well imagine, with a project that has a price tag in the high 200 millions, there's not a lot of companies that qualify for this kind of work, and they also have to be companies willing to work in the public sector, which also limits the field somewhat. So it's great to not have to put this out to bid to everybody, have a bunch of people bidding on the project who don't even qualify, and then to have people who perhaps don't have experience in this kind of thing. We received 6 initial proposals. We received 6 initial
Interest,
people
yeah.
coming to our walk-around. 3 of those firms decided they were not going to apply, and the other 3 firms did apply. They were 3 firms that we had hoped would apply, so we were very excited to see who was applying. And those firms were Gilbane Builders, Gilbane Builders, Just Gilbane, all right. Skanska Building, Inc., which is Skanska, they were the contractors who built the Wellington, and Suffolk. And all 3 are known in Eastern Massachusetts. All 3 do work in Eastern Massachusetts. So we invited them to come for interviews. During the 2-week period between that and yesterday when we interviewed, their references were checked. All had superb references. So they all sort of started on an even field with the references. And we interviewed all 3 firms for an hour. They were all given materials and asked to address 4 basic questions. One thing they were asked to do, and I can say this having done construction projects in Belmont for the past 30 years, is we told them we wanted to talk to the people we'd be talking to in the field. We had no interest in talking to the CEO. We were happy to meet him or her, but we knew they weren't going to be here except for the ribbon cutting at the end and maybe for the shovel in the ground at the beginning. So the people we wanted to talk to and see who we might be dealing with were the people that were going to be on site every day. And all 3 firms complied with that. And I can say that was the first time in my experience that's happened. And I was very pleased that they all did that. And they allowed the people to talk and to do the presentation. And that's not what contractors generally do, and I'm sure some of them were a little bit uncomfortable, but it gave us a flavor of what we would be dealing with over the next several years. All of them are very interested in this job, and all of them were well qualified, and it was very, very tough to narrow it down. And what you do is you rank them highly advantageous, or not. And then, after all of that is done and you have that completed, you open the envelopes that they have written their price on. And you rank those separately. Yeah.
Just to be very clear, it's their fee, it's not the cost of the job.
I'm sorry, it's their fee. It is not the construction cost of the job. It's what they would charge us for this
Manage.
part, to manage this project. And so we opened those, and it actually came out that the way we had intended or ranked the firms at the beginning, after the interviews, was the same for the fee. And so the firm that was ranked the most highly advantageous for Belmont was Skanska Builders. They will be placing as an executive on the job the individual who was the project manager at the Wellington. And then under him, there were other people who did address this, and we have some very senior people who will be working on this project. The number 2 firm was Gilbane, and the number 3 firm was Suffolk. As I say, all 3 were very well qualified, and any of the 3 could do the job.
So what's the next step, Pat?
The next step is for this committee, the high school building committee, to vote to engage in contract discussions with Skanska. And if we can reach terms, which we feel we can because we included a contract as part of the documents that they saw, so they know what we're looking for, then that will be the firm that we hire as the construction manager.
Thank you. And they'll be here at our next meeting,
And they would be here
starting to work right away.
next week. Right.
So I want to first of all thank our subcommittee for selection, including Phyllis Marshall, Bob McLaughlin, Joel Mooney, and Pat, and our OPM, Shane, and our architect, Brooke. This is no small feat. I brought the documents that were reviewed here in my Let It Snow bag. I can do that now because I'm sure it's not going to snow anymore. And I think that it was a well-thought-out process with a lot of dialogue and a lot of good work. And this was a unanimous decision, Pat, that
Yes.
we feel strongly that this is the right firm with some very good points. So I would like a motion to do what just Pat said, which is enter into negotiation to finalize the contract, which has been reviewed by town council very thoroughly with comments. So it is already reviewed by town council and by the construction manager, so this should go pretty quickly.
Pat, you're chairperson, you make the motion.
Oh, you want me to make the
You're
motion?
the
All right.
chairperson of the committee.
I move that the building committee enter into contract negotiations with Skanska to manage the construction on the Belmont High School.
Second.
Thank you, Joel. All in favor? Okay. Any opposed? Just for the record, that's unanimous, and we'll take that back to Skanska and get that work started right away. Any other questions about this? We now have our full professional team for the project. We have our owner's project manager, we have our architectural team, and we have our construction team. And with that, we should be able to answer any and all questions that come to us, including schedule, construction logistics, phasing, right? Those are things that we've been a little challenged with, and certainly now we have 3 firms doing pricing, that being our architectural firm, their sub-consultant, Peter Bradley, PMA. We have Shane and his group at Daedalus, and we will have Skanska and their group. And hopefully 3 people could come to a very good understanding of what the right price is as we move forward. So thank you. I'd like to move now to the next item on the agenda. And this time, Chris, I think you're going to flip this over to the site design update. But I want to give a little history before you get into the details. And that is that we have members of the building committee have been reaching out to different folks in and around the high school to talk and gather information relevant to the site design. What people feel about it, particularly how the safety of walkers and bikers and the traffic clash or shouldn't clash. And we've taken a lot of notes. And over a period of, I think it was April, we had safe routes to schools, we had all sorts of meetings, and we gathered about almost 50 comments that people had said. And out of those 50, these are suggestions, design options, considerations that we should look at as a committee, because they were looking at the same thing we've been looking at, which is the design that was done earlier on. We met with TAC, we met with Planning Board. I forgot to mention those two, very important. And a lot of things were repeated, but all in all, I think about the 50 comments were good to really dig into. And of those, 32 were relevant to what the high school building committee has within our sort of authority. And about 15 of them were outside of our authority, either being within the town of Belmont, TAC, say, okay, traffic advisory, beyond the high school, or school committee, school department. But they're still all relevant. They still all pertain to the site and how things go together. So collectively, we're working on this. But I will say that from the building committee side, we're getting prepared for a presentation Thursday to TAC, and that will really hopefully engage the public on great discussions, follow up to what we've been talking about. And I want to say that we have a document here that is entitled Transportation Access Consideration, which is the response to the 32 comments within the high school and Belmont High School Building Committee's authority, and I asked that the building committee, we're not going to go over this today, but this is just information that you can review in preparation for the meeting, either TAC if you're coming, or our next committee meeting on the 16th, which will be a discussion solely on site design, update, and traffic. So this will be part of the discussion. In addition, in the last week, we received a letter from Walk Boston, and you know, we've asked our design professionals to talk to them, which our landscape folks did, but they wrote a letter. Who's Walk Boston? Walk Boston is an advocacy group for safe walking in and around the Metro Boston area and all of Massachusetts. I find out that they started almost 30 years ago, and they were one of the first, I think the first in the nation. And since then, they've established a national organization, and so we have some leaders in the Massachusetts area on safe and better walking conditions to promote, you know, the betterment of the environment and our health. And so they are very interested. Now, of course, they're a little biased in how they look at things, but that's fine. They wrote a letter, and bottom line is, at the end, they want to talk to us, and we certainly want to talk to them. So the building committee will reach out to them and get a meeting going so that we can continue our discussion. We ultimately have the same aspirations, making sure that getting to the high school site and getting around is safe for walkers. It encourages walking and biking, and it makes Belmont better. And I think, all in all, that's what we're doing. Our design professionals hear very clearly that that's what Belmont wants. By the way, certainly at least the civil group, if not even the landscape group, are sponsors of this. They're non-for-profit, so they look for contributions. If someone wants to contribute, I'm sure they'll be happy for that. And they've done this to many municipalities. They've given this service. This is not charged, so we don't have to look for funds for this. They're willing to do this. So all very good. So you see a letter that's in your packet, and I think that's all I have to say on traffic, but I want to have just a preview on the site design and traffic by Brooke, I guess, right? You're doing this?
Yes.
Okay. And then I'm going to open it up to some questions on that. Again, not digging too deeply into the details, but I still think it's an opportunity for us to hear from the public.
So as Bill mentioned, we've been engaged in a lot of public conversations, and some people have noticed that we've kind of waited to this point to make a new iteration of the site plan because we really wanted to gather information from TAC and the public about traffic and access and parking and safe routes. So tonight we have a more developed site plan, which takes all of these aspects of the project into consideration. And frankly, a lot of these points on this, which I don't want to go through one by one just due to time constraints, but a lot of them have been imposed and put into the project. So I think in order to see it more clearly, and I also want to mention again that the Ring Road, which we can call it the Ring Road, there may be other, is there,
The Phelan Pass.
Pat Bruce Boulevard.
so the Pat Bruce Boulevard, I like that, she deserves it, is intact, and a lot of the elements are still here. We're still looking at a two-way in, two-way out circulation. Again, this plan is set up for a lot of flexibility. What we need to do at this point is get trash and deliveries into the site. We need handicap parking close to the building. We need transient parking, which is visitor parking, to the front of the building. So these are things that, let's make sure I have them all. Deliveries, trash and trash as well as trash, transient parking, handicapped, and what's missing? Emergency access. So those four things do need to access this project, which will require a road. How much parking can be adjusted, but we think we have a really nice site plan that allows for that, because this road accommodates those things. We had a very well-attended regulatory meeting today. We've had several meetings today. We've had a regulatory meeting, we had a security meeting, and we had a steering committee meeting prior to this. And the fire chief there's been some discussion about whether or not we need these loop roads at the entry. So this is the high school entry and middle school, and the fire chief was very clear that that was required, that he would like as much access around the building and to the front door. So those are still intact here, and that's where the handicap parking is also located. If you don't want to use it, you don't have to use it, but it's there for emergency and it's there for handicap parking. So if we go, I think it's good to go to the next slide because this really starts to talk about, and if I went through this letter point by point, you would start to see some of the aspects of the comments integrated into the plan. So this is a pedestrian circulation plan. And what the team did was, and we have a lot of people working on this, a lot of brains. We have landscape and 2 landscape teams and a civil team, as well as the architectural team working on this to ensure as many safe, efficient routes to the building. So there was comments about making sure we have an Alexander underpass connection. There was comments about how do you get from the field to the gymnasium, field house. So that's where this route came in. There's discussion about how to get quickly to the building. So that's where some of these diagonal routes came in. There was also conversation about eliminating the parking at this point of the entry off of Golden Street. So it was relocated to the back to make for safe travel as well, so the cars aren't pulling out where the pedestrians mostly walk. So there's still a link to the intergenerational paths to get you to the middle school area here. There's been a lot of conversation about whether or not parents would drop off on Concord Avenue. This doesn't preclude doing that, so that could be in the plan. Stop signs, signals, and so you can see a lot of attention on exactly how the pedestrian would travel through the site. Then we took into the same level of intensity the look at the bicyclists on site, and you can look in here at point number A3, create sheltered bicycle racks. Yes, we did that in locations close to the building, sheltered bicycle parking, as well as a location on the route to the entries. And the building will have 2 primary entries, as we know, and those are the entries that will be the AM entries. So you can see there's the potential future community path, and we're integrating that into the site plan to ensure that would work. So I'd like everyone, maybe at a later time, go online, take a look at this. You could actually go point by point to these notes and see how those are integrated into this.
So these 32 comments were grouped into 3 categories, I forgot to say. First, one category is these comments are good and they're incorporated into the design. Second category is that the design professionals feel it's not appropriate for the site. And the third category is that these can be reasonable changes that could be implemented to the site, and future discussion and consideration should be made. So sort of we grouped them into 3 categories, and obviously the further dialogue doesn't stop when we submit in July. These are some of these suggestions should be put in place now, not wait for the project. So these are some good suggestions to even try, suggestions that some of them are really not a big cost, if a cost at all. So all in all, this was a great community engagement. I feel anyways, after participating, that this Belmont community has a lot of good ideas that really can shape and form the project with good success. And so we want to continue to do this. This presentation to TAC and this discussion on the 16th doesn't mean that we're done in the discussion. It's sort of just a point where we could sort of solidify the design for the next submission. I think I was talking to a few people that said, well, you can't change anything after September. I'm sorry, after the submission with schematic design. Shane, close your ears. And I said, well, that's not really true. Okay, there are things that we can change. It just gets very hard to do, but that doesn't mean we're not going to try to do something, especially if it's right for Belmont. We have plenty of time to continue this discussion through the summer, through the fall, and into the next year with a successful vote in November. We got a lot of work to do. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop talking about any of these topics that we've talked about already, just to get to a point, a schematic design submission. We should continue to discuss this. So that being said, I'd like to see if there are folks that want to come up and offer some comments about, right now, it's the site design update and what we're leading up to, which is really a dialogue on Thursday and our next committee meeting next week. So if the comments, I'll ask those folks to come up to the mic over here, because that's the right thing to do. State your name clearly, and then go right ahead. And there probably is quite a few comments, so we'll try to keep them brief and to point.
I will try to be brief. First question, is this on?
I sure hope so.
Okay, for the first, my name is Ann Paulson, I live on School Street, and a number of people in the area have been working together to make sure that the design that is finalized for the high school really does not create an untenable situation in the neighborhood, especially since the design continues to have the entrance to the site across from Golden Street, which means that people will come speeding down Golden Street, across into the site. And so people are really very concerned about that and feel that it is creating and may create a very unsafe situation. I'd just like to comment that 82% of the children who go to school in Belmont go in our neighborhood. The Wellington, the Burbank, the Chenery, and the high school. So almost all the children in Belmont are either walking or biking or getting out of their parents' cars on School Street, Golden Street, Oak Street. I know people park all the time on Orchard Street, especially down past the circle, in order to drop their children off at the high school. So it really requires that the town really look at this very seriously because we have lots of children. And I think the goal in Belmont should be that the children can comfortably walk and bike to school. We shouldn't assume that children who live north of or just above Hillcrest, for instance, will need to be driven every day and dropped off at the high school. Or even driven down to the Wellington, because people think it's too dangerous for the children to walk. So I think we all need to think about that. Secondly, I have a question, and that is, could you tell me what the width of the Pat Bruce Boulevard will be? Sorry, I won't do it again.
I think it's pretty cool. But anyways, we have parking on both
I
sides.
think the word boulevard kind of gives you a flavor for what I think it's about.
So our traffic folks aren't here, but in discussions with them just recently, we were informed that it's 24 feet minimum width for the two-way traffic, and then parking on two sides.
Okay. My husband and I got up one morning and we measured the width of the Wellington driveway. It has one-way traffic and parking. The width with the one-way traffic and the parking is 56 feet. So if you add another 12 or 13 feet for the second lane, because you certainly don't want them bumping into each other, you are adding from 56 to 69 feet. If you add a bike lane, they have to be 3 feet, or I think more than that. You're getting up so that you have a roadway running around our very lovely new high school of about 75 feet.
That was a question. Let me tell you that it's not 75 feet, it's much less. We don't have a bike lane in with the traffic.
So are the children going to have to ride, you have a bike lane running right up there?
The bike lane is separate from the traffic. Yeah, but Ann, that is a very good point.
Yeah, okay,
Now,
so I'm just saying,
let's just continue that,
yeah.
because you did ask a
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
As Brooke said, this is designed as two-way. It can function one-way. When we started with Wellington, it wasn't clear which way, whether it was one way or two ways on that campus, and so the width was provided to allow flexibility. It stays one way today simply because it's working based on the first design. This can go one way, this can go two ways, this could go one way east or one way west, but the infrastructure, we're being told by our design team, should be put in place to allow that flexibility in the future. Things change. But we don't want it too wide where especially if it's one way, it's just too much pavement. So we hear you, and we're not, that's why I asked that question, because of course you and I have been having these discussions.
Right, sorry. We have been, my neighborhood has been talking about this issue since November. So I think that there is some concern, continues, and we will be talking to the Traffic Advisory Committee on on Thursday evening. But I just hope people in the audience understand that we want to have biking and walking. I am a member of Walk Boston, I will say that. And we want good biking and walking to this high school. Many of us think that driving this design that has been established simply encourages more people to drive their children to school and to drive around the campus. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. I have to say, Ann is one of the most outspoken advocates that I've been talking with about the walking and biking. And I'd say we don't want good, we want great walking access to the high school that's extremely safe. So we're working towards those goals.
I am Jessie Bennett. I live on Trowbridge Street, which you can kind of see on the right-hand side of the map. But my question's actually about the other side of things, which is the two crosswalks that seem to be going across from, oh, I just lost it.
Okay.
Next one? No, it was like this one here. So at what points on Concord Ave in front of the school will pedestrians be
Right here?
encouraged to be crossing?
This is the bike one.
Oh, that's all the bike, okay, I'm sorry.
Right here.
Yeah, here, that's the one, yeah.
So they're noted there.
So,
So you're saying the crossing here,
the crossing
right
at
now?
Godin,
and here.
that concerns me because it's a very busy spot.
Isn't it extremely busy?
It's extremely busy. And so, I know that, and you, it was fantastic to have you come to the Safe Routes to School Committee meeting. That was really, and we felt like it was a great opportunity to kind of brainstorm with you and because on the Safe Routes to School Committee, we're constantly thinking about these issues. And but I see that, and that, to me, I find really worrying because that spot isn't good. And I think one of the things we had talked about in the meeting was maybe pushing the crosswalks off of the corners.
So you said put them in the middle. And I don't want to get into a lot of detail, but I would say from our design professionals, they said very bad idea.
Okay.
Because the movements that are occurring here, right at the intersection, and you know what, I don't want, come Thursday.
Okay, good.
But
Okay.
but we asked them really, that this is a question, not even a question, it's one of the comments, move things to the middle. Let's start with the fact that this is an extremely busy intersection. Everyone agrees, Golden Street, Common Street, very busy. I'm sorry, Concord Ave, very busy. How do we make it safer? We should first ask that,
Yeah.
okay?
That's just, yeah.
First ask that, because even if they don't go across, they've got to get by Golden,
Yeah.
okay, from this side. And what we've been told is a signalized intersection. Okay, now, a lot of people don't like that idea, but we're being told that's the safest way to cross. Now, once you do that, they have a very safe way to get across Concord Ave, because it's signalized. It seems rational. If you eliminate that, now they have to cross without any signalization. Maybe not cross Concord, but they certainly have to cross that extremely busy Godin. And then, what you're gonna try and do is put a cross offset from that, and you can't do signalization that close, so you have to pick one. So I think we should continue that discussion because there's also iterations of where the drive, the Pat Bruce Boulevard comes out, and certainly if we offset that, then there's more confusion to people, walkers, and everybody, bicyclists that are trying to cross there. And let's have our design professionals explain how simplifying connections allows people to understand what movements are occurring. And we could have a discussion, but they should be in this meeting. This wasn't a real detailed meeting discussion, but that's really the heart of the discussion. How do we make this condition that's there today safer? Let's start with that for walkers and bikers. Forget the cars, I agree with Ann. Make it safer for walkers and bikers, and then see what the impact is to driving after that.
Yeah, and I think that, like, if we are gonna have a signalized intersection there, then there should be a time where all cars are stopped. Like, when the pedestrians are able to walk, all traffic should be stopped.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I just wanna make sure that we don't have a situation where somebody's allowed to turn. Yeah.
Very dangerous,
Okay, yeah,
okay?
so, okay.
If one's expecting everyone to stop, and especially with kids, right, because what do they do most of the time, right? So we need to make sure that it's super safe, and that's the whole idea of adding signalization, is now you've taken control of that intersection, and it could be programmed in a variety of ways beyond what I could even think about. So that's a big plus, but that's not necessarily where a lot of people want to go with this. So we got to continue to discuss that.
Okay, great. The only other question I had was, in the new design, are we bumping any of the parking off of campus, or is it all? able to remain on campus?
So we had a meeting with the planning board, and they are realizing that that's a discussion that they need to really come to grips with, is how much parking is appropriate for the campus.
Okay.
So we'll have follow-up discussions with them. At this time, they're talking about it, I believe, because that was on the agenda right now. And the reality is that there's accommodations made basically for no growth on the campus with the parking. It was just accommodating teachers and they have to go on, but that's it. But maybe the students aren't parking on campus, and maybe it's just staff that's parking on there. So that's maybe the bookend, because I can't imagine we're not going to allow teachers to park.
Oh, no.
You know, so the bookend might be just the teachers or what we have today. But we also have to consider the civic event, and that's the other information we gave them, which is if you pull all that out, what happens with our civic event? Right now, the parking count is equal to what the capacity is with civic events on the campus today. Okay, with the ring road, I'll call that, the road around the pond, with the parallel parking that goes on there on non-school
So
events.
when we're parking over there for town meeting,
Exactly, all of that, right? Bandorama, graduation, you know, all that goes on. So all good discussions. Those aren't as frequent as the daily use of the school, but certainly still has some level of impacts. And by the way, we experienced no student parking on campus when the Wellington temporary modulars were there. And, you know, I think some of the neighbors might comment on how that worked out, because that was, I think, 2 years, 2 school years that occurred where the students were displaced for the additional staff and also the modulars that occurred on the site. So we have some history there.
and is it appropriate for me to address the school committee while I'm up here too? Or is this only?
Yeah, well, yes, Susan.
So I just wanted to put in a plug for a hope that we have more, with the 7th and 8th grade students in particular, that we have more buses available to bring them to school. Because I think that will greatly decrease the amount of traffic. I think that the move away from busing in town has just increased traffic near all of the schools. And I don't relish the idea of half of the parents driving their kids into my neighborhood every day. So, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Zoe Armstrong. I'm an 11th grader at Belmont High School. I was specifically worried about the cross over the railroad tracks. I'm a frequent biker myself to school, and they tried to attempt that similar crossing 2-3 years ago to go over the railroad, under the railroad tracks, and the neighbors all around there started protesting and posting signs and stuff against it. And I'm assuming also with the constructions going on across the railroad tracks, they might not be able to complain about it, but it's just worrying because of what happened in the past.
Okay, so I'll say that right now it's not going to be part of the high school project, because it's not, but it is something that the town is advancing as regards to planning. And I'll let maybe Adam or Mark. Okay.
I'm out here. So I'm the liaison to the Community Path Implementation Advisory Committee, and so the Board of Selectmen did vote on recommended path by that committee, which also includes an underpass at Alexander. And we're at a point where we're exploring ways to fund the feasibility study. So that clearly is part of the plan, and what we understand is that the path has to be contiguous to Alexander Avenue to at least succeed in getting funding for an underpass. So it'll be part of the community path at some point, hopefully.
Because it would be really helpful for bikers to have that path, because
Clearly.
currently I have a friend who lives just across that main street on Wynn Street, and instead of just being able to go over the railroad tracks, which might take her 5 minutes, she has to go all the way down onto Brighton and then all the way back in again, which takes us up to 10 minutes at a time. And it's really frustrating for her because it's just it would be such a short distance. So it'd be really helpful for people who live over on that side of Belmont.
And it would, we're being told, and I think it's logical to expect that it would reduce the impact to the south side of the site on Concord Street if that opened up for people to walk right through, right?
Yeah.
So it's a good thing all around for Belmont. I thank Mark and the selectmen to moving that along. It's
We've
a
always
long
been
path.
concerned it's a safety issue. It's illegal to cross the tracks, first of all, but it's also a safety issue as well. The kids have been doing it since I was going to high school, so it was many, many years ago.
It's 100 years.
It's 100 years ago, right, Lisa, thank you. Yeah. And so, whenever we discuss the community path, what's always been a consideration is an underpass at Alexander, not only for the community path, but also for the residents on that side of the tracks. Because kids are going to cut over the tracks because it's just quicker.
So the building committee has high optimism that that will come to fruition with our Board of Selectmen and other interested folks in the neighborhood that wants to see that. So the design has accommodated and planned for that future connection in the pathways that occur here, so.
Also, if we have time, I have one more question.
Absolutely.
And if this isn't relevant to this meeting, feel free to stop me. But currently at Belmont High School, we have a one entrance, one exit policy where you can only go in through one door.
Mm-hmm.
Is that gonna be upheld at the new high school, two entrances because one for the middle school, or?
Yes, so this is a great segue, if you're the last one, into our next, which is the design update, and we could let our architect then make sure that she's explained the entrance and exit movements, because I think that's what you're asking about, the entrance and exits for the new school. Yes, there's more than one.
Awesome.
Okay. Thank you for your comments tonight. We have one more?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe you have an answer to this, but my concern is you're going to have this ring road. It's going to have parking on both sides.
Well, that's still being
two-way
debated.
traffic.
Yeah, that's all being debated. Is there parking on one side? Is there parking on two? Is it two ways? Is it one way? Is it one way only?
Because as someone who walks around the school a lot, having traffic two ways and having parking, it just seems the kids cross back and forth on the road. They just are going to.
What do you mean by kids?
The students.
Okay.
So you're going to have, it's so much easier right now the way it is, you only have to look one way to cross the street, but to have to watch out for cars, parking, and for two-way traffic, that just concerns me.
Right.
That's not safe for students.
It's pretty similar to probably most parking lots in.
See, parking lots are very unsafe to me.
And they are. Let's face it. And so we're looking at ways to improve that, and we are in discussions of ways to reduce the count of parking.
It seems like the one way in, one way out, that's the way it works. That's one way that is shown to work. I don't see these being a benefit.
Come Tuesday. Come Thursday.
And the
I'm
other
sorry.
thing is,
Tuesday.
again, this Godin, I live on Myrtle.
I think that you're going to have a hard time being picked up.
The Godin entrance, exit, I just want to make sure that you're realizing that it's not just Godin and Concord, it's Godin and school and all the way to the Wellington. That's a mess. I think this two-way traffic is just going to make an impossible situation. And I know I know everyone agrees it's impossible,
Yep.
2 corners or 4 corners, but this would just seem like it will make it worse. It's like the underpass going to Leonard Street. Yeah, everyone knows it's horrible. Or the 4-way stop at school in Godin. We're told it's the best we can do, that it's horrible. But it just seems like this is going to exasperate an impossible, what I think everyone agrees is almost impossible situation. So
I wouldn't use that. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but what.
4-way stop at Godin
Oh,
school?
it's probably a good solution for the conditions that were there.
That's what I mean. It's
Yeah,
an
okay.
impossible situation, and this is the best they can do.
But I don't want to be quoted that it's impossible.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to move on to say that that the discussions of putting two ways entrances on both sides is fundamental in saying if it's one way from east to west, all the traffic dumps out back on Concord Street, where, in fact, the students are trying to cross. Okay, so I suppose that intersection with a signal will still help them cross, but we're putting a lot more traffic. With the two-way, some of the traffic then can go back and exit east cleanly and not impose as much stress on an already stressful situation. So that's some of the background and discussions that have gone on, but again, this design can be changed around, and with the road, it could be one way. This is signage.
Yeah.
The infrastructure's there, it could be one way. Trucks coming in then, deliveries will all come back out onto Concord, even if they're going that way, right? So they only exit, if it's one way, everything is coming out back on Concord. And it is the way it is today.
It seems like that works the best.
Does it really
way
work the
is
best?
Today. Yeah. And
Okay.
having that offset exit. Anywhere just a little bit to
Okay.
the side of.
Our traffic consultants are giving it a grade of an F. integrating level of service. So they're saying it's bad level of service right now. So come Thursday, they're going to have some analysis that suggests that there's some improvements that could be made on how traffic moves and pedestrians could safely get across.
Okay.
Okay? Should be a good discussion. So thank you. I want to move this on now to the design update. Oh, yes, I'm
Before
sorry.
we switch the topic, I mean, just I don't know if the people here realize, but this document that we got here, the non-recommended things are actually a lot of the things that the neighborhood of Myrtle, Oak, Godin, and school and all have asked for.
Correct.
Don't add a four-way stop at Godin and Concord. It says no, offset the new entrance from four-way configuration. They said no, close Godin Street median. They said no, Trowbridge one-way, Underwood one-way. They said no. I mean, the thing to keep in mind here is that the Board of Selectmen is going to be doing this town-wide traffic study independent of this, and could very well be that we end up making Godin one-way, or not putting a signal there, or closing Godin median strip, or making a right turn only out of the high school, because that's the selectmen's decision to make.
Correct.
So I would say, whatever Nelson Nygaard's doing, they should have contingency plans for these outcomes, because I'm not, because this is, you're doing on campus, but this other off-campus stuff's, a separate process.
So Nelson Nygaard is also presenting to TAC with the tax consultant, which, as you know, is BSC Group, and they're looking at all the other stress areas. So, including what happens right at the outside, and sort of, I wouldn't call it peer review yet, but they're also looking at this information that was sent to them, and also providing comments. So there is collaboration on the tax side, which is the town side, and this side. And I'm not saying that they've agreed to any of this, by the way. They just received the information this week, as you did. And so that's, we have two design professionals that are experts in this type of work, and we have to let them sort of explain why their positions are the way they are.
Understood. I appreciate that they're communicating. I mean, I like the things like the sheltered bike racks and such. I think are a great idea. The thing is, the Traffic Advisory Committee is advisory to the selectmen, and then we make the decision, and we've been getting a lot of comment, to put it politely, from the neighborhood over there, of which I'm a part, so they certainly reach out to me. And, it's going to be very difficult if every single one of the things they suggested is being not recommended, because it looks like there's just no give at all.
Well, let's always look at this in light of what's safer for the walkers and bikers in that area. And I think that, Adam, you bring up good points. Let's keep asking ourselves. That's what we're going to ask on Thursday. What is right for the safety of those people that are walking and bicycling? And then is that, and for the people that live there, what does that mean for the impact to the neighborhood? Right? Because we don't want to make a condition less safe.
Right, no, but you could close the median, put a crosswalk, and it'd be much safer.
I don't know that, though. Let's have our design professionals answer the questions that are asked. Is it going to be safer or less safe when you do these things that are suggested? In other words, block the median, which might mean that people have to go and do U-turns further up, and is that safer?
Well, I mean, because the problem is, if this gets baked as a design at some point, and the driveway is here and it's fixed, and then we, through the Traffic Advisory Committee, the selectmen, do something different with the Concord Ave-Godin intersection, you're stuck with a road that isn't going to work. So I'm saying they need to look at alternatives in case we do something else.
This is still flexible, Adam. This is why we're talking to, I think, besides the Board of Selectmen, I hope that it's part of Planning Board, because they feel that that's something within their purview, okay?
Yeah.
So all these groups we're hoping that they're coming together in the next 64 days to a point where we have some consensus as to where that goes. And for all the reasons you brought up, it's important that this communication continues. So we've loaded up meetings with TAC. We understand we're probably going to have a subsequent TAC meeting after Thursday with Planning Board as a joint meeting, and then we're going to have another Planning Board meeting, and maybe some of the Planning Board meetings needs to include Board of Selectmen. I'm just suggesting that, so that these discussions happen in a collective environment rather than silos, so that the town-wide, these discussions and decisions are made with a very clear, based on clear evidence and a clear purpose.
Well, I think that's the proper process, because if everyone's not working together, this is too big a project to work at all, so. I mean,
And let's just make it clear, everyone is working together, right?
That's what I hear.
Yeah. Thank you, Al.
Just one quick comment,
Okay.
sorry. So I live on Godin also, so I know we're a really active community. so-
I know who you are, but I don't think many people do.
Yeah, so I live right on Godin,
Can
and
you
I'm right
just
across
tell
from
me
the
your
high
name?
school, Chi Ting Hua.
Yes, thank you.
So, you know, I do believe that putting a signal there will make it much safer for walkers. I do believe that. However, what it'll also do is encourage traffic to go through there. And today, I don't know what was going on, but there was some diversion of traffic onto Godin, and it backed all the way up Godin. I think it went, it might have gone all the way up to the Chenery. And nobody was moving, and that cannot be safe for kids, even if you have a signal there, because now you have traffic all jammed through that intersection. And people are going to go flying through that if there is a light, which also makes it very unsafe for kids crossing. So, you know, they're going to cross if there's a green light, they're going to cross if there's a walk signal. And if somebody's flying down that road on a green light, that is not safe for a kid. And so, you know, every design we've seen since November has had that entrance to the school right across from Godin. It's a straight shot down Godin right into the school. It's a pretty fast road as it is. So, you know, I don't understand. I think it's really hard for us to understand how this is still the best route, because we really haven't seen any justification of why it can't be moved off or why this is the safest. Because, you know, rationally, just seeing how the traffic has been the last few weeks, with the jam up of traffic all the way up Godin and all the way back up on Concord, how this is actually safer, even just putting a signal there.
We'll have to continue this discussion on Thursday. I think you might have to thank Common Street reconstruction right now, because people are realizing that it's shut down and finding alternate routes, because that's been happening for a while.
Yeah, but I think, but again, you know, if you put the signal there, they will take that as a shortcut, go right around, because there's a signal there, and now you can shorten out a lot of that traffic.
You know, there's discussion of making Godin one-way.
Yep.
Maybe it's one-way only during the morning. You know, there are many things that could happen. As Adam said, this is a town-wide discussion of what happens beyond the campus, and it needs to be done collectively. That's why the building committee hasn't gotten a final decision on what's right beyond the campus. We have some evidence that will be presented on Thursday, and the town consultant BSC group is also looking at this. So there's still much work to be done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill, can I just make a comment?
Yes.
I mean, one of the things that we could think about, and perhaps this is being considered, is in the morning and in the afternoon, when it's the heaviest volume, we could just have police detail there directing traffic. I mean, you have the traffic lights, but you could also have, no different than emptying sporting events, you know, we might have police presence sort of directing traffic. That could provide that extra layer of protection for our kids and direct traffic. I mean, traffic lights are great, but sometimes folks don't obey them, people are speeding, so if we ensure that, you know, there's police presence there directing traffic in the morning and in the afternoon when the school empties out, you know, that would create an added level of security and safety.
I mean, there's proposals to say block the intersection, you know, close the median across from Godin. I mean, that's one of the
Well, I
proposals.
mean, I think we have to think about that. I mean, I think
Yeah.
Adam's right in terms of, you know. how
But
we
that's just
look at it
gonna,
as
what they
well.
say, it's gonna stress a different street. I mean, it's gonna promote potential illegal U-turns. And so let's table this till Thursday. These are all good comments. It's very difficult for the building committee to make a decision when so many forces are coming at, and there are other influences that need to be discussed at the town level. So we have work to do, but we're continuing the dialogue. And I do appreciate the comments, and I hear them very clearly. We got to finish Common Street, because I think it is causing some problems over there on Godin Street. Building design update.
So, we're here and we're building a wonderful new high school, which includes the middle school students, and we're excited to report where we are with the planning of the project. And I always want to bring it back, I mean, traffic is key, but we want to bring it back to the kids, the students, the staff, and how they'll work in the building. So we've had some really good meetings with the 7th through 12 steering committee. John has facilitated these meetings, as well as the department heads, and we're getting really specific with the feedback, and we're able to implement that in the plan. So I'm not going to go through, the lights are pretty strong here on this screen. I'm not going to go through all the details, because frankly, I realize with the light, it's a little washed out. But a couple of really exciting things. First of all, what you'll see is, and you have it in your package, that we are looking at developing each area in a more refined way. So we're working back and forth with department heads on those areas. The 11th grader, sorry, I forgot your name, so
Zoe.
where are you?
Zoe.
Hi, Zoe, thank you. Right now, actually, your comment came up in our regulatory meeting today, so I don't know, you spy in the room, but you must have been telepathic, because we talked about entries and exits into the building. Right now, you have an entry on the middle school side for the 7th and 8th graders, and you have an entry on the high school side for 9 through 12 students. There was discussion, I think you've had a little change in plan lately on how you can move in and out of the building. So right now, you're more limited to going in where the admin is. So that may continue, but it does show that we have 2 means of entries, and we may be limiting to that. We had a whole discussion about the details of all that, which we won't get into, but your question was addressed today. So in general, we've made some really nice plan changes. We rotated the auditorium to walk in back of house and look at the proscenium, which is the stage as you enter, and that was a really good move. We've been able to make all of the visual and performing, really the performing art spaces contiguous, and those are the blue spaces in this area, so moving chorus downstairs, making the theater shop more accessible to the stage and the path of travel. This is the administrative area with the technology, and that's all falling into place nicely with a lot of areas. We still need to program that. If you recall, we have the dining commons in the centralized area of the building with access to the green space at the pond, and that serves as a pre-function space to the auditorium. So we're really happy with how the auditorium is working with the pre-function space. If you squint your eyes or look closely or put your spectacles on, you'll see that we started laying out the athletic areas and trying to make them very flexible and accommodate the need that the school has. So your plans in front of you will show that for those who have it. We're looking at nurses area. So we're starting to develop the plan in a more articulate way. We put the fitness center back downstairs, so all of these spaces are contiguous. So we are getting the feedback from the staff and the directors and the principals and the superintendent, and that's how this plan is getting developed. And if I were able to zoom in here, you would start to see walls and doors and it looking like a real floor plan, which it is now. So this is all modeled, and this will lead you into some of the perspectives walkthroughs that we're doing. So you'll see some furniture. Remember last time you saw this area of the middle school reconfigured, so that's starting to populate that with furniture so you can see how it feels. I'm not going to get into every detail. There was a lot of discussion about grouping science, having them on 3 floors, 4, 4, and 4, and with a lot of juggling and a lot of attention to that, we were able to accommodate that wish. So we're kind of checking the boxes on what people need, and
That's a big thing for John and his science department, right, John? Getting the groupings right for the science classes.
It absolutely was. And I will thank Brooke and her team, as I usually do, that after every steering committee meeting and after every director feedback session, there have been shifts in movement around what the educators feel is really appropriate to what happens with students and teachers every day. So the science one was a really big deal, so thank you very much for that.
we were scared for that one, but we made it happen.
Thank you very much, appreciate it.
And there are lots of nuances, like the teachers want their director's rooms next to the teacher planning room and next to a seminar room. So we're really just taking all of the feedback. We go back to the drawings, and you see them all. See Jamie's there, so it's nice. So that's how the plans are developing. So if you have any particular questions, specific questions, we can answer them. But I think the key is that we are accommodating one by one the needs of the staff and the faculty.
So a part of this meeting tonight was getting into the virtual reality of the
We're working
drive-through.
towards it.
Okay, here we go.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about, kind of refresher for those who haven't seen the building in a little while, about why the building is the shape that it's in. It's really about bringing the actual upper school and the lower school together and organizing around this fantastic streetscape that's in the center of the building. We're going to get some views of that to Chris to walk us through in a bit. But it's also about the extension of that space kind of out into the landscape. So the idea that the high school entry really extends out to Concord Avenue, kind of invites you in, that there's this strong connection at the center of the building to the pond, and that there's an equally kind of strong entry at the middle school. It's set up really nicely to look over the fields and kind of down the green space of the building. So this is kind of diagrammatically that central street. And we're going to talk a little bit, before we get into the VR, about the kind of character of the outside of the building. To start with, the idea really is that where that street kind of meets and gets closest to the edges of the building, at the entries, that the building gets more open, gets more glassy, more inviting, and that the areas that are in gray here at the perimeter, the areas that are classroom spaces, are really efficient, and they're about bringing daylight into the space, and they're about creating an envelope that is sustainable and that is efficient. So these are some massing views, just looking, kind of hovering over that Concord Avenue, looking towards the pond, and talking about how the circulation space in the outside of the building really gathers you and welcomes you in from Concord Avenue. This is one of those moments in the building where it will open up and kind of be inviting at the main high school entry. So looking across Concord, kind of at that main entry, those paths kind of collect at that neighborhood essentially and welcome you into the building. You'll get views out kind of towards the pond, and you'll begin to see the landscape kind of wrap around the building as a place for recreation, a place for community.
So just for those that haven't seen these images before, our building is not white, and it's not, this is just a modeling technique.
This is really just to give you a sense of scale, and to really sit the building in the landscape and get a sense of what it's like to be near it, so you can understand kind of sense of scale and a sense of mass.
Well, it's not windowless.
It's not windowless either, right? I meant to say that. This is a massing tool.
So again, looking at some of those pedestrian pathways and how they move adjacent to the building and kind of continue on, so that the landscape is contiguous and something that really connects well to the pond and to the paths around the neighborhood.
By the way, just so the pond is not that visible today, and we've had discussions at regulatory, COMCOM will be going to next week, and the idea is how that connection is made, what's there today, what improvements can be made.
That's right.
What was interesting, and Pat, I don't know, I forgot who said that years ago, Jamie maybe, they used to fish in that pond.
Yes, it was Jamie.
Catch and throw, I
He
think they
used
were
to
doing.
fish.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
so our
it's very
local
common.
historian in the regulatory meeting, that was pretty interesting, and not that I'm suggesting that that's a plan here, but it was that accessible. But no, the point is that it was that accessible.
There, they just don't eat it.
Right, it's catch and throw, but it was that accessible, that, and today, when you look at it, it
There's
doesn't.
only two ways.
There's a barrier almost all the way
Yeah.
around the pond, so. And if you look at photos of when the school was open in 1968, 1970, there was very little vegetation
Yeah, it was
around.
almost completely open.
Oh, it's almost nothing, it was very stark. So,
So right now, the vegetation is stabilizing the edge of the pond, so there's a balance between removing parts of the vegetation and having access to the pond.
invasives.
Does everybody want to fish there again? No?
I think that could be a program that John talks about with the Director of Nutrition. We'll save that to another meeting. So, are you up? Okay.
So we're going to run through a couple things we showed last time, maybe not everybody saw this, but trying to kind of build a story and ideas about what's driving the building and the way it looks the way it does. Part of it is looking at the history of the place. And so this is an old map, and this is the original site, and originally there wasn't a pond there. And so that was dug out. It's called Clay Pit Pond. It was dug out to actually make brick, and we thought that was a really kind of interesting history because it kind of has a certain kind of character and feel about it. This is in making the brick, laying them out, and you can see how they have kind of an interesting pattern. They're kind of laying on the ground and stacked up against the side there, but it gives kind of a certain scale and character. We thought that was kind of interesting in terms of the history, in terms of something we might grab onto. The other was thinking about the actual civic center of town. You know, very stout monolithic buildings, red brick, slate, and so looking at the idea to some of the character, the gray, the reds, and so we started talking internally. We talked about it a little bit last time. Should it be red? Should it be tan? What color should it be? So we kind of started digging a little deeper and just realizing that the civic core isn't just the red brick, but it's also stucco and stone. So there's a lot of earth tone colors there and very light colors. And so we began thinking about what might be the right color for the building. So that's the civic core. The other thing is the actual site itself. When you come down Concord, it's actually in a neighborhood. And that neighborhood is made up of a bunch of houses, clapboard houses, siding, shingles. And if you actually look kind of carefully, the character and color of that is a lot in this lighter earth tone color. And so we were kind of talking about that. Does it make sense that the building is of and a part of that? Is it a red building or is it a light tan building? What should it be? So we kind of just very quickly in the massing model looked at largely what it would start to feel like if it were red or if it were lighter. And this is not intended to represent white, but maybe a lighter color, which we'll show on some details in a second. But one of the things is that, when the building is kind of red, we have a lot of great sunlight facing the south, but with the courts themselves, in the morning this court will be a little brighter, this will be dark, in the afternoon this will be a lighter, and that'll be dark. But with the red or darker colors, it might be something that feels a little darker, particularly in winter, early in the morning or late in the afternoon on those two entries. And so one of the thoughts or questions was, should we think about a lighter building? And I think one of the things Patrick was starting to talk about is the introduction of more glass here, more glass at what might be the library here, or more glass at the entry would be something that would help kind of that kind of feel or that character a little bit. So we started, last week we talked a lot about terracotta and brick. I think there was a general consensus that it's kind of a brick town. Brick is something that we kind of like here in town. And going back to those clay pit images, there's kind of this interesting scale and kind of horizontal character, whether it's an interpretation of kind of clapboard siding or an interpretation of brick, but giving it kind of an in and out and a movement. So again, one of the great things, it's south facing, so it's in the light all day, and so you really get a lot of great shadow play. And so just some of the things to kind of think about while we were looking at that. The other discussion we had was because the majority of the building, a lot of the building, particularly from the second, third, and fourth floor, is the classroom, which is basically the 30 by 30 room, probably about this size. And Patrick was mentioning this idea of kind of taking in the landscape. Two things. How do we optimize? We want to do a very sustainable building, drive the energy loads pretty low, reduce the electrical loads. One of the ways to do that is to actually harvest as much daylight as possible. And with the orientation of the building, largely that long axis east-west, a lot of south-facing, very easy to control daylight. We looked at a series of windows where these are all about the same percentage, but whether it's more of a vertical punch, a very simple horizontal strip, that's kind of what we talked about last week, and you can kind of see the percentages. This percentage is kind of important because it ties back to our energy model. Our energy model right now in cost, we're basically on about 30%, but the idea is that this would probably come down a little bit, 22 to 25%. And then some of the other areas will have more glass, but the average overall is about 30. So this is kind of a look at those percentages. So you can see with the horizontal, you have pretty nice sweeping views out into the landscape, and then again, the opportunity to bring that daylight in. So that's about a 4-foot opening across the full width of the classroom. As we started to look at it on the outside, I don't know if maybe concern is too strong of a word, but horizontal is nice for daylighting, but we want to make sure that it's kind of a little more playful, a little more scaled, a little more in character, because a lot of buildings that you see, a lot of commercial buildings have horizontal windows, and so we're trying to think about how to break that up, make it a little more playful, make it more interesting, and bring that daylight in. And so a couple was to kind of reduce the width of it a little bit, maybe add a clear story, and you'll see in the elevations what this starts to do, or to kind of break that up in a different way, which still brings in the views and the light in a horizontal way, but kind of makes it a little more interesting than maybe what the top right is. So this is kind of where we were last week. This is what we've been looking at over the last week. So we started to look at what we call this kind of two-window option, small window and a longer window, some sort of horizontal brick, a patterning kind of with those windows, but some sort of rhythm in the facade with the glasses kind of jumping around. So that was a little more horizontal and in the red. The other was just to show what that strip window looks like. Just straightforward window across the top. Pretty simple, pretty basic. But the idea is there's some way to give that kind of brick some sort of character with a vertical element to that, which is basically on the window module of about 5 feet. Then we kind of looked at that first one that I was just talking about, but more in a lighter color. So is it more like a limestone and light grays? Do we look at grays, limestone, earth tone colors? To kind of make an interesting kind of palette, and then some sort of horizontalness to it to kind of give it that scale and breakdown. And then we kind of, the last one was where we had the windows kind of bundled together, but they're a little tighter, a little more efficient. And so we were kind of looking at a couple of variations on that. And you can't see the detail very well, but the idea is here that while we integrate the window, bring the daylighting in, try to make it playful, that, and then the lights. The other thing is with the light color, the shadow, the detail from the shadow will show up a little better as it's kind of looking south. And so beginning to think about this in precast or brick kind of idea. So this is a little bit of a vignette from that last one. There's kind of a horizontality in some of the historic buildings. The idea of kind of modulating the brick in different scales, or kind of an AB pattern where it's kind of repetitive. This is another building in Boston here where it's kind of horizontal and vertical kind of mixed together. So these are some of the things we're kind of starting to look at with brick. And then the last one is just kind of a couple things. Some of these are this happens to be terracotta, but the idea is kind of, you know, very simple, very light in color. But to kind of give it this kind of rhythm and playfulness, it's not only in the windows, but it starts to happen in the facade, actually, when you're up close to the building. And one of the things we want to think about is on these windows, how do we actually kind of screen the inside a little bit from some of that direct sunlight? Because if we would have shades, which we would always have shades, but with that direct light coming in, we want to make sure maybe there's a device, a horizontal element like an eyebrow or a sunscreen element, or in this case, with a metal panel or a baguette system, which comes from terracotta, you can kind of go in front of the glass and she'll see through it. So it's a way to kind of screen it. So these are just a couple images in that lighter color, and it begins to kind of show the texture and the kind of play of that when you start to give it some detail. So that's kind of an overall of where we are. I think the next time we'll have a full walk around of the building, kind of looking at these, just kind of based on comments and some of the stuff we can show into that.
So are we at a point now, or in the very near future, we have to make a decision on how we're skinning the building? I have to guess we must be coming up to a point.
Yeah, because, well, right now we have a number in the budget, and I mean, it would be great if, I mean, there's a number per square foot. If it's something that changes in the future, as long as you stay inside of that, you're fine, but it's based on, right now, like a pretty detailed brick system now, right?
I think the building committee needs to start getting things in front of us where we could say, yes, maybe, get rid of that one, and start to narrow it down to the selection that we'd like to make for this building, because at schematic design, we want the building to represent Belmont and our decision, not just still something that's up in the air.
Right, and I think the color is less of an issue. I mean, we can work on color, work on materials, work on precast brick, or, you know, the other thing would be a commitment to some sort of sun shading and shading device, because there is a cost to that.
I think just the pattern of the windows on the inside. We have people that are, you know, are weighing in on what the inside of the rooms, they're spending a lot of time in these classrooms. We have to understand what that will look like and which one we're choosing. I think that it wouldn't be right for us to conclude schematic design and still have these four options on the table.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem right.
Yeah, and I think the discussion last time when we talked about it, I think there was a little bit of a leaning towards this, is what I remember hearing, just because I think it kind of gives these nice sweeping views of the landscape.
I could say that I heard I heard that the vertical windows didn't have much support at all. I'm not sure whether it's that one upper right or some variation of it as you're starting to work, but we should
Right,
be
and that's
working
why
on
we
that.
started to look at these, because they're kind of a variation of this, and, you know, we have to look at the percentage based on sustainability. You know, we want more glass in those big public areas, and we want to tighten up the classrooms a little bit, but we still want to get great views of daylight.
I think we're going to stick with brick. Is that right? I mean, we talked about this today, I don't know if people know, but brick is one of the cheapest building materials in commercial buildings for skin. Maybe not necessarily for residential, but on commercial buildings to meet the energy levels that we need in the heating environment. That usually proves out to be one of the most economical versus metal panel versus terracotta you brought up, precast. I mean, it's usually brick.
Yeah.
Color, different issue.
Yeah.
Again.
Color and detail would be determined.
Any comments on the committee? Yeah, Joe.
Your glass schemes, are any of those operable? Are any of those windows going to be operable? It looks like you just have slabs of glass there.
They're operable.
Yeah, they would be operable. I mean,
So is it like a
Like a panel or a couple panels, yeah, we could, I mean, they're always operable. Yeah. And we haven't shown that detail yet.
The other thing is, given the wall height on the buildings, to me, the horizontal patterns that you have look disproportional. They look like they're almost too squatty. I think the glass should be higher. And I don't have a problem with separation in the glass if you go horizontal with some type of separation, like spacing them out, maybe not as drastic as you have on the one to the left where you run your panels all the way up.
Yeah.
But a combination where the glass would actually be higher and maybe a little bit more spacing in between. I don't think you need all of that glass. I mean, I'm for a lot of glass, but I don't think that, for me, I'm not comfortable with anything you have there right now.
Okay.
And I asked Jamie, she teaches in a classroom, is it important to have views out, or is it more important to have proper lighting and control?
I mean, for me, I'd rather have the lighting, since you don't necessarily want the kids super interested in what's going on outside of the classroom necessarily. But I like the horizontal better than the vertical. It feels less, feels just more open to me.
Any other comments? Yes?
I think maybe not so much on the interior, but relative to the exterior images, where you're showing us examples, I think it would be helpful. It feels to me like the images that you're showing are maybe not necessarily, like these, are not necessarily school buildings. I think it would be really helpful if you could show us examples of other high school buildings, because these look very corporate or commercial or something maybe not quite what we're looking for with the school that's in a residential neighborhood. So I think that would be helpful if you could maybe find some other examples that are a little bit more relative in that regard. And I think also with the windows, I tend to agree with Joe that I like the horizontal better than like the very tall vertical ones, but it maybe doesn't need to be quite, I don't think it's quite there yet. I think the two that you proposed this week are better than the two from the last time. I think we're heading in the right direction, but I think that maybe the proportions would still play with a little bit.
Yes, you spend a lot, Terry, in classrooms, right? What's your perception of what you want to see from a classroom in regards to windows?
Well, I have to say I'm a little bit spoiled because I work in a building that's been renovated, but it was old. The original, I don't know when it's from, but at least 100 years old. So my classroom has the entire width of the classroom from about 3 feet high all the way to the ceiling, operational windows the whole way across.
Okay.
So I like a lot of glass. I also don't like the vertical. I think for one thing, they're going to get disgusting at the bottoms of the glass in terms of dirty. I do like the horizontal. I think that I think it's okay if it doesn't go all the way across because, there's desks and stuff and shelves you might want to put up. So I think you still get the same amount of light. My main concern is that they definitely be operational. And
they will have operable windows in every classroom.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think there's, any of the horizontal ones, I think, have some different benefits to them. I don't have a strong feeling.
Yes,
Okay.
Kate?
I had one question and one suggestion. Along the lines of school examples, being able to see typical school furniture in the classrooms, I think would help us visualize, the functionality of those horizontal. I agree about the vertical windows, but I just, from the teacher's perspective, I imagine knowing what that looks like with bookshelves or tables and chairs, how you can see out those windows. These rooms are so empty and there's a standing person, but most often we're seated around a table doing those things. So I think it'd be helpful to see that. My question is, I got a little confused in your presentation about what percentage of glazing that you're aiming for the classrooms versus overall. And for these classrooms, I'm seeing 22% or 22.8% glazing in some and 28.5% glazing. And if you could just elaborate a little more on what the target is relative to the sustainability goals.
Well, right now we have, and Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, 30% is the average for the whole building. And
Could
so,
you just speak up a little bit? I can't.
30% is the average for the whole building of glass for non-glass areas, and that's what the energy modeling is being based on. And so you can see right now that all these, even the ones that have the extra piece, that's almost at 30. So that means that at the big kind of public area, and you'll see this in the virtual, the model, when you do the walkthrough of the model where the areas are glazed more, like that pocket where dining is looking out at the pond, and at the entries where we have the library on the lower school and the main entry on the upper school, there's more glass in there. So that percentage, if we stay down in this 20, like if we 22 to 28% range, those areas can be a little higher. So if we're down in this range, we can have a little more glass. So that's what the model's being based on right now.
So I was just going to say, it would be interesting, depending on what classrooms would be in rooms with window opportunities, to think about what creative teaching opportunities are presented by choosing one type of window over another. I mean, literally, you know, like whether it's lima beans in plastic bags, or artwork on the windows, or photography classes that benefit from lighting of a different variety. It could be interesting to think about those opportunities aside from, or in addition to, aesthetics. So.
I think that's good. I do expect that we'll continue our conversations, but at some point, we're going to have to put a path towards making decisions come June. We're working within our budget right now, is what you said, which is good. We're not going exotic. We're taking percentages that are reasonable for schools on the overall aggregate, I think 30%, and working towards our energy model and goals of C&E. So we don't want to diverge from that too much. But you heard comments today that we're not quite there yet. And I don't even want to get into a discussion of color yet, because I don't think that's paramount. I think first is what does it look like from the massing and how does it function, and then we could probably get into color. Because that's a whole nother discussion. Okay. But I do think that there's an opportunity for the public to come up, but I understand there might be a drive-through, Chris, on this next that maybe we could do, because it'll also demonstrate some of the feel of the interior spaces. Are you steering?
Chris is
Is it dark enough in here for everyone? You can see? Everybody can see?
Yep. Do you want to tell us what you're going to do?
So Chris is going to drive, and I'll try to narrate as he drives. It's hard to do both at the same time.
Okay.
So this is right at the entry to the high school, and what Chris is going to do is kind of walk.
Bill?
We're going to
Is
start.
it possible to, I just heard somebody say if we could lift it up on the screen a little bit higher so that people can see more easily, is that possible?
It's fixed on the ceiling.
There's no way to adjust it?
You can get up if you can't see, you should
If you
come
want,
up.
can you stand maybe? I'm sorry, but that's fixed on the ceiling. I'm sure there's a way, but I'm probably going to get yelled at by the school department if I go fiddle.
Just showing where we're starting. So we're going to start at the red arrow there on the west end, and Chris is going to kind of walk through the public spaces and kind of take us on a tour up through the building and into some of the areas in the middle school and in the high school. So this is the main entry here. The entry to the administrative suite will be on your right, directly visible on this side. And you're looking into the dining commons and kind of out into that landscape area where there can be outdoor dining and views kind of out into the pond. And as we said, you know, determining kind of how much we can thin out that landscape will determine how much view you get from there.
And this is glass, but we're not going to expect all this glass.
Yeah, this is really a very rough model.
We want you not to be too literal about everything. When there's a lot of glazing, it means more transparency. Some of the walls are solid, but they'll have doors and some glazing, so it's still an early model.
So then walking through on the right there, you see the area for the lower school dining that's kind of sectioned off. And you'll see the stair that brings you up through to the main space for the lower school.
So that area will probably extend into the other space because we need to get 400 students in there.
So this is the stair that will bring students up from the lower school entry directly into the lower school library and media commons. So you're seeing the open portion of the library for the lower school there, and beyond you're seeing the kind of closed, quiet section. And that area kind of looks out over the entry to the lower school. So moving up then to the 8th grade floor, this is kind of looking down into that library space. And Chris, if you could turn around and walk towards one of the innovation spaces for the lower school so you can get a sense of the scale of those spaces. So this is the area that's directly outside the grouping of 4 to 5 classrooms for the lower school. That gives the teachers the opportunity to have breakout areas where there can be desks, seating that are project related.
And we're not showing the lockers yet. There are lockers in that area, one-to-one for the students.
Oh, there are lockers, yeah.
Just on one floor.
That Chris.
So this is really the neighborhood for the lower school, for that grouping of teachers that can keep kind of.
So this is 100 students?
It's 100 students. This is kind of the front door to the home for those 100 students.
And we've worked with the teachers on how to populate that with furniture
And on that floor, you'd be looking into the maker space for.
Is this the 7-8 maker space?
Yeah.
Correct. So it's directly adjacent to their space. So then leaving the lower school, coming back into the central commons, you get the sense of kind of looking out over the pond. And to your right there would be the center portion of the open media commons for the whole building. And beyond would be then the closed portion, the kind of secure area for the library.
There's been a desire to make sure that we have quiet spaces within that.
That's right.
We haven't populated this with the little project rooms yet.
Okay,
but
project room.
they'll be here in that area.
And then moving up to the 3rd floor. That's one of the neighborhoods for the upper school. So the high school corridor, and you can see that we're trying to place the stairs at the end of the corridor so that no matter where you are in the building, you have a sense of the outside, sense of daylight, and that even though it's a large school, you're not going to get lost. You're always going to know where you are within the building.
I remember my high school, my first year, it was all looped around courtyards, and it was you didn't know wherever you were because it was just all the same view every time you walked around. So it looks like this has different views every time.
It does, and really the kind of spokes of the wheel, they always come back to that central commons, that multi-story space. And part of the function of that multi-story space is not just to create a kind of room at the scale of a large community of students, but also to be a real wayfinding device so that no matter where you are in the building, you're coming back to that space, you understand where you are in the building.
So this would be maker space for high school?
Correct.
Like robotics and
Correct. And as we develop this, we can talk about how this space is carved up and how it can be used flexibly for all the maker programs within the building. So that's a quick tour. You can see we continue to develop the model and put more detail into it. And we have a VR set up in the room adjacent here in the cafeteria. So we can break out after and people can actually put goggles on and feel like they're inside the space.
So that's a good introduction. I will say at this time that I'll open it up to comments from the community or more comments from the table. And at the same time, as Patrick said, you could go through this door and you could experience your own walk through the space with the VR goggles. And if you don't want to put the goggles on, but you want to see that activity, all you have to do is watch the screen of the person that has the goggles on, so it's actually being projected live too. So it is very unique, and I would that's right here if anyone wants to go.
Since this is a really big audience, I would say that we could start that now for those who want to try it, get in early.
And what I'll do is just.
I like that woman. She is. All right, so we'll be in there.
Someone's going to come. Don't do anything yet. Don't break it. And we're going to have opportunities for the committee to do this after we get done with business as well. Yes?
So just a question about some of the I love the aesthetic of the open space. I think it looks amazing. When we're walking through it, I got this sense of like, okay, here's one big gathering of kids in the cafeteria. Directly above that, here's another big gathering of kids in the media center. So can you talk a little bit about how that won't be deafeningly loud?
So we've been meeting with our acoustical consultant, and we have to rely on them. There are a lot of vertical and horizontal surfaces in which they can apply acoustical attenuation and devices there to help absorb the sound. And because the innovation spaces overhang some of the civic common space, that's a good ceiling for absorption, so they are studying it. That is not our expertise. I mean, if you know how many specialty consultants we have on this job, it is not just us, we have a force of people. So we really do rely on them. We had several meetings, maybe 3 meetings with them so far, and they're back. They're actually going to the school. We asked permission to go to the school and measure the sound of the train, and so they're doing their job, and we have to let them do their job. And if they tell us, and we made it very clear, I would say this in front of Pat, that we will not compromise the acoustics or design.
Thank you.
That is fundamental. because
Yeah,
we
no,
know
that makes a
you-
lot of sense. That
So
feels better about it.
if they say something doesn't work, we will listen to their advice on how to alter the design.
So Brooke, they should come and measure the cafeteria here during middle school. I hear that it is deafening, just to, John, but just out of comparison, but we don't want it.
You can't really measure
Okay.
a space to determine another space because the
Well-
acoustics and the materials are totally different.
Yeah. Go ahead, John.
I wanted to comment on the space outside of each grade level team. We have 7th and 8th grade students who will be at about 390 per grade, broken into 4 teams of about 100 students. And I think it's really important for our 7th and 8th grade parents to know, or our younger students who are coming into 7th and 8th grade, that school of over, 2,000, 2,500 in its aggregate will really be broken down into 2 schools of 400 and then a team of only about 100 students. So their day-to-day experience will really be smaller. And then that space they have outside of each team will be able to have that flex space that if you walk the Chenery any day, you'll see students in the hallway doing projects on the hallway floor. So teachers are really yearning for that kind of space. And when we met with the educators of the 7 through 12 steering committee, that was a big piece of what made 7 and 8 work. And I think when we get over to the high school, we have those, the V, and we have the collective area right there where we have, teacher rooms together, and we can have teachers working across and hopefully cross-pollinating with ideas about curriculum across departments is another great aspect of that, and really look forward to having that kind of a model. But I think our biggest worries when we look back at our visioning work we did over the 5 full-day sessions was really about the careful separations and the thoughtful connections. And I think we got 7 and 8 really, really right. And I think that our high school piece is really coming together, and the science on all 3 floors with the electives, the way that they're spaced on the first floor. I really have to say that the building, in terms of its addressing the program of what we want for our students, 9 through 12 and 7 and 8, and all the things that we were worried about and excited about are really coming together. So I really appreciate the work of the design team.
Thank you.
Yes, Tom? Oh.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Alrighty. Hopefully my question is quick. In looking at the stairwells, it looks like some of them are really beautifully open and wide, and that looks great. I didn't have a sense from vertically how open they are, because I know, we've got a lot of levels we're talking about here, and I'm pretty familiar with 7th graders. If there's, depending on how many floors are collected vertically, if there's a clear drop, that becomes very attractive to drop things. So are there, but there, the way that the stairwell is constructed, sometimes there isn't a clear,
Well, I think you're
hollow
talking about,
center area.
you have a staircase like that somewhere?
Right.
Chenery. So Chenery.
The octagonal stair.
Right,
yes.
we don't, our staircases aren't designed that way, but I will say that, remember, the middle school is only 3 floors generally in the middle school, high school 4 floors, but I think you have a void in your stair. You're wrapping around something. I should go look at it because everybody keeps talking about the stair.
Yeah, it's
Where our stair is more of a scissor stair, so it's not designed with that hole, but could someone drop something down the stair if they really wanted to try? I guess you'd look at a traditional stair to see if that could happen.
So we had this discussion with Michael McAllister, principal of middle school, John, if you remember, and yes, there's concern of those stairs that are in the corners of the middle school and the one they use all the time because it's hard to monitor them. But he felt that these stairs were much better because they're in the open. And so they're more visible for monitoring and you know, the students feel like they're not in a corner, they're out in the open, and so that gives them less tendency. I think, as Brooke said, if someone wants to do it, they can do it, but the tendency is less when you have eyes on you.
So we
John,
have
was that the discussion we had?
two monumental open stairs, one for the middle school, one for the high school, and then we're utilizing our fire stairs as egress stairs. So the idea was to make them transparent at the front, so you don't have them, maybe fire glasses there, they need to be rated, but they would be more like your corner stairs in this building, right? The corner stairs. Those are really wide stairs, so I don't know if we're that wide, but we'll make them generous enough to house the occupant load.
Tom?
Two quick questions. One, as John said, part of the early vision was this innovation space around the teams, which I think is great, and I love the fact that it's come together. I do wonder again about the noise question, and maybe this is a question for both the design folks and the teachers on the group. If that is the area where the kids are congregating right outside those classrooms, is that going to work, or is that going to be so loud when there's a group there that the other 4 classrooms are rendered sort of ineffective because of the noise? Or maybe it's something that the sound, the acoustic consultant could take on.
The acoustic consultant is really focused on mainly those yellow areas. Of course, the auditorium, because that is to be beautifully designed acoustically, but primarily because a lot of the spaces are pretty traditional in their layout and repetitious. The classrooms, most of those yellow spaces, which are the innovation spaces, is where they're focused on. So the ones in the center, the ones along the classroom, and the breakout spaces at 7, 8.
Okay.
So that's their
So
focus.
they'll take a look at that.
So,
They're
but
looking at all
are you,
that.
I think, if you go to level 2, are you saying, those spaces there that are sort of learning commons outside any walls, and its proximity to the quiet spaces next door?
I'm actually less concerned about that, and I was looking more on sort of the east side where you have the innovation spaces adjacent to the team areas there, where you effectively put an open space outside 4 classrooms, like right outside the classroom doors.
Well, those are spaces that we imagine will be highly monitored. You're not going to have kids out there running wild. I think you'll have teachers with students.
Yeah, John, I think you could explain, those are really more
Yeah,
teaching
the
spaces.
The teachers actually wanted clear visual and physical pathways out so they could actually have students go in and out, and there could be group work done and classwork done. They
Yep.
could get in and out of those spaces. So I don't think they're worried about the noise in those middle school spaces as much as they're worried or wanted to see, which I think was achieved, that visual sight line and that physical sight line so they can go in and out if their group was doing small group work out there and coming back in, et cetera.
John, we currently have a lot of that group work being done in the hallways now,
Right.
according to my
That's correct.
7th graders.
Yeah.
So
there's a
is it
lot.
an issue? Like, how do you feel about it now?
They feel like they want the students to be able to have better space to do that work.
Right.
That
Yeah, they're sitting
Their
on the
teaching is
floor,
leading them
right.
towards doing student-to-student work, group work, cooperative work, and that they need good space to do it. And they think that that's the good space to do it. So that's really fitting the program that people want to see in the future of how teaching should be. So they're excited about it. I thought, Tom, you meant, more in the middle of where the stacking of the cafeteria goes up to the library.
Which I think is the concern that Emma raised, which
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with as well. but
So
I think it-
just
yeah.
for point of note, this is an enclosed space, this is an enclosed space,
Yeah.
this is an enclosed space. This is open to here, but this overhangs, it's a cantilever over the space, so there's a roof to absorb sound. But that is being looked at, and we made the direction very clear, so we understand the sensitivity, we're working on it. We're seeing a lot of these spaces in a lot of our schools across the country and other schools around the country to have these kind of active innovation, common spaces, just more like a college.
Yeah, university setting. Yeah.
Commons, yeah.
And then if I may, one other quick one. I love the fact that we kept the pool. Is there a way to keep that pool and the air in there contained so it doesn't feel like the entire first floor smells like a gymnasium?
That's the goal.
Yes, that should have a negative pressure so that it's not bleeding into the school side.
Everybody's
Exhausted. I think that's what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Yes, Diane?
Just to build on the concern about the cafeteria and open library learning commons areas, I think that what you're doing with the home bases is really working out well, but I feel like in those big open spaces, not just acoustically, because acoustically we can address that with the acoustic engineer and whatnot, but I feel like the scale of the space just feels a little overwhelming, especially maybe for 7th and 8th graders. It just feels really big and really open with people looking down and really sort of chaotic and overwhelming maybe. And I'm wondering if you can give us some context compared to the size of like the cafeteria and library at the high school currently. How much bigger are these open spaces, and are they maybe broken down more than
Yes,
it looks
so
like
you're
now?
not, every one of these spaces is a full design project, as you know. You're an architect, and we're gonna go through that and break down the scale.
Okay.
Because, for example, we know that the middle school might have some distinction here, but it's gonna probably bridge across. There may be layers through this area that are perpendicular to the glazing. To break the scale, we're gonna need recycling. We might have a kiosk for food. There will be other larger elements in that space to break down. We will not have one contiguous open space like that.
Okay.
We just haven't gotten to the details there.
Okay. And do you think it would be possible for you guys to give us a sense of the scale of our current library and cafeteria
Well,
at
the
the high school? just to
cafeteria,
kinda
if I
compare?
remember
11.
correctly, is 7,000
And
existing.
we're going from 7 to 11, right?
And
Okay.
the new is 11.
That's the seating
something.
area.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And not all of that, Diane, is 2 stories. I think the middle school side, which would be the far to the right, does not open up.
No.
And the idea that John and Michael have been talking about is to get a sense of ownership of their own area. And they're controlled a lot differently, as you know, right? They're seated, and then they're brought up to the lunch line in groups, and then they come down in their assigned seats, as opposed to the high school side, which is, it's free-for-all. Yeah, I mean, so it's a much different environment, so it has to be somehow corralled, and that's the discussion that's still going on.
Okay. So I think that those features that Brooke is talking about will be very important to see as the design evolves, just sort of how we're breaking that down, because as it is currently shown, makes me nervous. But I totally get it that will get to a point where it will feel
Yeah, and you'll
more
start to see,
intimate.
you'll see it in perspective.
Okay, great, thank you.
How about some comments from the folks here?
Okay, my name's Mary Lewis, you've all seen me before. Thank you for this. I think each time I come, there's some new absorption of community input into the design, and so I really do appreciate that. I do have a few questions about the windows. Looking at the windows, I have to agree with Joe DiStefano that I don't like any of them. But I also have a question about whether this sort of effort to look more playful, which I actually think looks less clean and less interesting than the straight lines personally, might also incur greater cost for the construction if you kind of have one up here and one down there and sort of a, perhaps not symmetrical design. And I think what I'm hearing from the teachers is they want functionality and they want light. And views are great, but I don't think we need like a little sort of transom window on top and then other windows, if that's just to sort of make it look more interesting. From the outside, I mean, I'm just one person, but I think the clean lines look much better. And I would like to endorse what Diane Miller said about making it look less like a corporate office building and thinking about what schools look like. So that's something I just wanted to, a bunch of us in the back over there were more or less in agreement about feeling that some of the funkiness of the windows, I mean, it's going to look dated, 5 years from it being open if you do it, you make, sort of make it look too sort of 2023. And you might want to think about sort of more classic looks that will last forever as you think about the windows.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi. Ellen Schreiber. I have a couple of observations and a couple of questions. One is some of the safety inside the building. As a parent of a middle schooler who, at least a couple of years ago, still liked to horse around a lot, I'm worried about some of the stairwells, I'm worried about some of the overhangs, and the sort of playfulness that certainly fifth grade boys can get into, causing somebody to go over. And I'm sure that you're planning for that. I don't know how high. I mean, if it's just a railing, then I do really worry about the safety of my child. He's in 8th grade now. He's not as bad. So let's see. I wanted to talk a little bit about the entries for the community events. I understand the 2 primary entries to the building, and I certainly understand the need for that for safety, but there's parking all over the place. And right now, if you come in for a community event, you're not far from the entry, and you can see the entry, and you don't feel like you're parked on the back of the building and having to walk all the way around to get to the entry. So, and help me. And so because, like, I see the loading area there, and obviously that's not a main entry, but I worry about someone parking over there, feeling like they're back on the railroad tracks, and needing to come all the way around to get in that, for town meeting or for a show, and you're young or you're a grandparent or whatever it is. And so I don't know what the answer to that is, but I wanted to mention it. Let's see, the athletic areas you pointed out are over here, which makes sense. But I'm also sort of wondering what the access of that is for fields and such, and less so for the afternoon when there's practices and stuff, but when some of the phys ed classes want to go outside, you don't have a huge amount of time to get from here to there. And so I'm just wondering, I don't need an answer, but I'm wondering what the thinking is about how some of those access outside. So cafeteria, I think you said that it was open all the way, and this is the middle school part and this is the high school part. But if I know high school students, they don't stay where they are, and for that matter, neither do the middle schoolers. So I'm wondering if there is a separation between the two, just so that the middle school absolutely positively has their own space and it doesn't get overrun with high school students. And my last one is about the exterior of the building. I agree, there is a sense of office parkness to it, partly because it's a gigantic building. But I also love, I love our buildings, our historic buildings in the center of town, and I love the historic buildings that are on, this side of the underpass. And granted, you're not building a building that's going to look like Town Hall, and it's huge and it's completely different. But if there could be some echoes of some of that, maybe it's at the entrance or something like that. I mean, I know that we're building a building in 2020 as opposed to 1920, but this is, those buildings are quintessentially Belmont, and we're not building a historic building, but maybe there is something that harks back to that. So those are my comments.
Thank you.
My name is Darrell King, Precinct 1. I have 2 comments about the windows. One dovetails with Mary's about playfulness of the windows. One of the mistakes made at the Wellington, according to a maintenance person there, was that there are so many different sizes and types that they had to have custom shades made for all of them. And when they broke, they couldn't replace them with standard sizes. So it's better to keep it simpler and keep everything more or less common, if you can. The second point is more important. it's nice to have functional windows that operate, but the more of those that we have, it's going to drive up the cost, but more importantly, it allows people in the school to cheat on the efficiency of the heating and cooling system, because they can be opening windows when they shouldn't. One of the largest costs driving this in the future, not just now, but forever, is energy. So we want to be able to heat and cool, control the humidity, and have sufficient air exchange, because everybody performs better when the air exchange is proper. So that's all tied together in the HVAC system, and we want to keep the price of operating that low, so we don't want a whole bunch of windows being allowed to open.
So one of the thoughts, that's a good point, we were talking, one of the thoughts is, it's very, very true that our mechanical system is, and Wellington's kind of like that too, is so fine-tuned and energy efficient that it has a hard time recovering in very extreme environments, like someone opening the windows in a very humid environment, right? You just can't recover. You open the door and it's blowing all the way through. So one of the thoughts is that maybe in our building control system, the classroom doors, that we might have a light system, green and red, where it's just signaling when the day is appropriate that you could open the windows, and if it's locked. Now, keep in mind that I think the police of that will be the students to some degree, because they are really into this level of making sure that things are efficient. So we're going to look into that. We're not going to have locks and things on the windows that are automatic, but we have to be able to open them for air, but we have to do it smartly, like you're saying. And so we're looking at ways to have a very efficient, not a costly system to do that. Maybe a simple light system might be employed.
Right, the folks at Perkins and Will did an incredible job showing us how we can get to net zero.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd love to do that. It makes a ton of sense for everybody. So we have to keep that in mind as we proceed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carolyn Bishop, Precinct 1. Random thoughts. I've been a teacher for 34 years and been through several renovations, rebuildings, and such. Most recent of a former school has been the Devotion School in Brookline, and the one part of that building that remains is the 1912 entrance. Out of 1973 building and 1950s buildings and the original 40s buildings. There's nothing wrong with traditional, and I feel that this looks more like something that is an office building or an industrial park out on 128, and really it doesn't say Belmont to me, and I think that must be so frustrating for architects who have so many creative ideas about open space and light and flow, and I see flowing children and railings overlooking a library, which should be quiet, with 8th graders above having their social life, or accidentally dropping a few things to tease a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a friend. And I just think there's a great deal of wasted space. It's wonderful vision, and it's very dramatic, but every inch or every foot or every level that is just open could be space that's utilized for meetings, for teaching, for classrooms, for practicing. Another question, well, the glass. Who is going to wash these huge windows? Banks and banks of windows, and all it has to do is rain and our windows are a mess. So inside and out, windows are vital. Obviously, we like the light. It helps the mood of the day, but we need to be practical too. This whole place has to be maintained by some lucky people. The security, I didn't see anything, and I'm coming to this late, so I do apologize, but is there a way to keep the rest of the building secure when the auditorium is being used for play, or when there's a game going on in the field house, or people using the pool on Saturdays? There must be a way to keep the rest of the building locked off, and that looks like the layout is good for that. There's one thing that I find very charming about the current old building, and that is the component of the students' art that is part of that building, the walls, the murals. And I'm hoping that there'll be room for this amidst all the glass and the open space, but places for students, because we have some incredibly talented students. Just seeing what's on the wall outside the town hall, the auditorium when we go to a town meeting. Stunning art. Music. The most important part of the whole system for us was the music. And I hope the band room is huge. I hope there's plenty of storage for all the instruments. I hope there's practice rooms, small rooms. I saw sort of theatrics and it was a little unclear, but to maintain that incredible music program that is outstanding in the state, and I would say in the country, is vital when this building is being built. So thank you for all your work, and I hope we can keep it functional and maybe a little traditional and maybe not so industrial. Thank you.
Great comments, thank you.
Madam, can we see the picture of the building with the red brick facade?
Is that the one?
No, it was the one showing the windows. I think part of the reason why it looks so industrial is the upper 3 stories look like they're elevated above the first floor. Is what goes on in the second, third, and fourth floor different from what goes on the first floor? Is that why it's elevated?
Yes, they're different programs.
What's going on the first floor?
Well, if we look at the plan, the first floor has the civic common functions, so you'll have the cafeteria, some of the larger art spaces, music spaces, which are 2-story spaces, as well as the auditorium and the admin. So there are some larger scale public
Basically, the
spaces.
2nd through 4th floor are the classroom.
If you go upstairs, you'll see classrooms, 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 classrooms.
Okay.
And that repeats itself with the center area that you see in yellow as being different, innovation spaces.
Okay, let's go back to the first picture.
The brick one?
Yes, the brick one. Even though the activities are different, does the design have to be different?
Well, we're trying to bring in more glass into that public area and make it more this is just a fragment of the building, so.
Okay. What about these ends here? In these open spaces at the ends, if it came down, and I think it would look more, I think it would have a more traditional look. And as far as the windows are concerned, what about these windows in this room here? I mean, they're very functional, and I suspect they're economical compared to a lot of other windows.
So we have to continue to explore that. That's, I think, that what we're hearing today, and how maybe brick at the lower level at some portion allows some continuity and more traditional appearance of the building rather than the mass sort of elevated above something a lot different at the bottom. I think that could be something that we want to see as an option.
Okay, thank you.
And just to make it clear, that saying why is there an overhang? Because the first floor doesn't have enough program to populate it all the way out to the edge. So it's actually pulled in. We can't build it bigger because of our constraints on cost. So there is a setback just because of how the square footage works out.
Okay,
But
another
that's
concern.
can I just finish? And I think that's an opportunity there for where the entrance, you have a shelter, you have an area of overhang that's nice for students to congregate before school or after school. So there's some opportunity there that's achieved.
One of the concerns that I had in looking at that overhang design is whether it's going to be an area where wind will blow a lot of debris in underneath the overhang.
Good point.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Sorry to come back for a second, Mike. Jessie Bennett, Precinct 1. I think it's beautiful. I mean, I really was moved by it, and I love the neighborhoods in particular. I really respond to that. I think it's fabulous, this idea of keeping a bigger school smaller for students, and I am so excited to see these things happening. I share Ellen's concerns about safety with regards to having too many opportunities for things to go over railings. How many stories up does the open space go? Is that just two? The two? Just the two, okay.
So we've made a real effort to, in the earlier options, there were 4-story spaces, and we said, okay, too big. But just a lot of, just to remind you that we're trying to get light into those spaces.
Yeah.
And we can't just fill on those voids, the opening in the floors, because it would increase the square footage.
Yeah.
So every move we make to do that, we have to cut out. There's no more allowable square footage left. So those voids bring light into that media center from the exterior facade and light down.
And I only speak about it because, like, I have a friend who works at Bope's Library at New York University, and they had 3 suicides in Bope's Library where they had open railings where people could jump down, and it's a big crazy box of a brutalist space, you know, like, and NYU actually ended up spending a lot of money a few years ago to put in aluminum grating so that they could keep people from throwing themselves to their deaths in the middle of the floor of the library. So that's a very morbid thought to be having, but it's a thought that I think of with regards to very emotional teenagers. And so I get very nervous about open railings with kids around, and so I just wanted to make sure that I kind of expressed that concern along with Ellen. If it is only 2 stories, obviously suicides are not as huge of a risk, but you know, injuries are definitely a risk. So I just want to make sure we think very carefully about that.
And this is a very common concern that we hear a lot with new building design.
Yeah.
And most of the high schools that you might tour have a lot of 2 or 3-story spaces. We went to one the other day.
Yeah, I mean, we had some of this dialogue, that's a very good point, Jesse, on the Wellington School, with the fact that they do have, you know, openings at the 2nd floor that look down on the 1st floor. And there was a lot of passion about that and thoughtful adjustments to make sure that it is safe for students. But I don't think that we're promoting, I mean, we're not building a building where we're thinking that there's danger, you know, opportunities. I think we have to be realistic that our children go to malls and other places where there's 2 stories, 3 stories and 4 stories, and be just 1 story. It's going to be more of pranksters and other things. And again, I think John and Michael have been looking at this, and where those are pretty visible and open. And it's not like it's some place in the corner where kids could find a reason to do this. There's going to be lots of eyes on them. So we're continuing to talk with Superintendent Phelan and Principal McAllister on those solutions that are in place and the safety of students.
Thank you.
How do we do? Any more comments? I think I thank the Belmont public for providing input. It's not just the 7 through 12 teaching group that John has, but it's also the Greater Belmont group that provides the input that helps foster good development in the project. So we continue to try to respond to these, and our next iteration will be more developed. I have to say that you have some work to do, Rick, on the facade, and Brooke on. We have to just think about our next presentation, trying to spend a little more time on the facade, because I think that's where most of our work is now, the windows and the outside. I think the inside with the teachers is getting solid, right? We had good things about it, but the outside needs work, and that's fine. I mean, I think that's progression, and we'll hear about that. My next agenda item is really quick, Lisa. We have a set of meeting minutes that were passed out. They're pretty straightforward. Please. Move approval. This is meeting minutes for April 26th. Second, Bob, all in favor? Aye. All right, thanks. I'm not going to be too much longer, but I do have a couple of business things to take care of, and they're pretty important. Number one, we have, and you have this is the committee meeting schedule through schematic design submission, and we have our traffic discussion on May 16th. And then to get in these major topics, for instance, net zero discussion, to get in a security update on just a general overview. I think people want to hear what we're doing with security. And then and then technology, how technology is fitting. We're going to need another meeting. And And June 7th is a proposed meeting, and then we added another one, June 19th, at John's request, to talk about schedule phasing and site logistics. We'll have our construction manager on board that will really lead that discussion. It's critical that in all of our interviews, Pat, right, everyone talked about that separation between construction
Yes.
and teaching and learning that goes on. And so we're going to make sure that's very clear on how that occurs with our contracting group. So we're going to talk about that. The schedule, by the way, Pat didn't say, all the contractors said they could improve our schedule on delivery of the building. They're not making promises of a year better, but they're talking months. In other words, we had this plan, if you look at delivering a building in, I won't say the date, but they're saying we can pull it back now, and we'll be looking at what that means in a matter of months. And it also has to fit into the school year. You know, it's a tough task to turn over a building and say it's ready to move students in April. I mean, what does that mean, right? For the school committee, and that's really tough. So we're gonna look at that in real time now. We're gonna look at how you start, what the first activities are, what are we doing in the summer? We're gonna be driving piles. Maybe that's a good opportunity to do that when students are not in the building. So that'll be the 19th. I just put that, that's a meeting that's been confirmed. And I'm suggesting it's a joint meeting for several reasons. But most importantly, Board of Selectmen and School Committee, the following meeting on June 28th, we'll be at a point where we're presenting the final schematic design and the package that will be not just then the binder, but it'll also be a set of drawings, and that needs a vote of approval to go into the MSBA for our submission in July. So I just want to let you know about those meetings, and these, you take it home, put them in your calendar, because they are booked in the rooms, and they're all confirmed, and the agendas are set. Any questions? If not, I'll go to the next item real quick.
Oh, do you need a signature from us?
Oh, I'm getting to that,
Yes.
yep.
We haven't done it
You're
yet,
3
but-
steps ahead of me, but I just want to say that we have a submission going in. So what we did at our last submission, it was called Revision 1 for staff meeting. We made a binder like this, and we approved it, and we sent it in. We had a great staff meeting. It was very positive. It was, John, I mean, we had a great dialogue. They really liked this so much better. They thought that it really responds well to the teaching and learning. They were happy to hear that John worked in getting square footages out, some square footage down. They were very happy to see that we responded with the cost coming down. And so together, they made a recommendation to submit PSR number 2, which is essentially just taking the PSR, taking this, and putting it together, formatting it as one, and that's what's going in tomorrow. It's basically this, collated in at the proper locations to a revised package. And so we have a submission going in tomorrow. We have a facility assessment committee meeting, so several of us will be at the MSBA offices tomorrow morning. Our commitment continues, and if there's no questions about that, then I would like the committees, each one, to maybe vote on approval. This is just a documentation of all the public meetings that have progressed to get to this point. It says that we've done this through the open meeting laws, which we have, and it says that this submission seems right to be submitted to the MSBA for their consideration.
What PSR is it? Number what?
This is, so preferred schematic report, it's what we're calling revision 2, okay?
So just one note, Bill, we'll have to reprint the cover page. It says April 11th, it should actually be May 8th that we voted tonight.
Oh, yes. How did that happen? Okay. Okay, my goodness. But the signature.
But we can vote it tonight, we'll change the cover page.
Yep, and I still have the signature. So what I'm asking is for a motion for the Belmont High School Building Committee to actually submit the package called PSR Revision 2 to the MSBA.
On behalf of the Board of Selectmen, I move approval.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, can I do that for the building committee?
I make a motion to approve the submission of PSR number 2.
Okay, thank you. That's second. Bob, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that was unanimous.
So for the school committee, do I have a motion to approve the PSR revision?
2.
2. All in favor? I didn't hear a motion. Okay.
Okay. I think that's it. That really concludes the business at hand tonight. I don't know if there's any new business. And if not, Bob?
Move to end the meeting.
Okay, second? Thank you. Thank you very much, folks.